Hello, everyone. Greetings. Thank you for joining my session today. I'll be speaking about data storytelling with user-centric design. So we'll try to first focus on what data storytelling is, look into the aspects of user-centric design, and then proceed further in from there. So before I get into the session, I would like to just introduce myself to everyone. Hello, everyone. I am Mohit Gupta, and I'm here because I love data and I love telling the stories which are connected with that. I have a very diverse background of solving complex data problems for Fortune 200 clients. I've worked for key companies where I've gotten looked at their data and analyze that data from both qualitative quantitative methods to realize that sometimes we are not focusing on the right problem. So today the session is going to be about that. Please feel free to follow me at my social media channels, ask any questions, doubt during or even after the sessions, and I'll be happy to connect. With that, I will get into the session. But a lot of things you would have heard today during the session would have been about what Couchbase has to offer, what it does. And I would tell you without no doubt, it's our best platform for NoSQL cloud database. So once you know your business, you understand your problems, Couchbase is the product which you want to go for. But let's take a step back. Today, as organizations, and with COVID coming into picture, the digital penetration is increasing way and way more. And that has also led to a lot of users using digital medias and platforms. So we have a lot of data also getting generated, which is going to be used and used for your product. So every organization is collecting a lot of user data. But are we doing anything with that? Because that data is something which is free for that organization. Are we using that data to understand the users better? So that's what I'm going to talk about. And that is the story we are going to discuss. So before we get into this, the aspect of data storytelling, let's understand the key aspect of every story. Why, how, and what. And the reason I put these three aspects together is because why tells you the reason behind the business goals, which help you in crafting the strategy for solving a problem. And once you have that strategy, the why is identified, you know the problem, then you focus on how you are going to solve that problem. And when you understand how collaboratively or what design methods you'll use to solve that problem, what are you going to do to implement that problem in your digital landscape? So you start any story with understanding the why, what is the real problem, what is the situation at hand, look at the data, what does data tell you about that situation, and what does your user say about the situation. Go to the how part of it, where you work together with your cross-functional teams to identify what would solve that problem. And then again, you take those concepts, test it with users, and again you get data to analyze it, and then collaborating on both of these data and collating it to come to the what part of it. So this is kind of a high level theoretical part to it, but we'll talk about examples as well. So let's first start with stories. I'll tell you a couple of stories from a real world scenario where we look at the data and how looking at the data from unbiased perspective was so helpful in identifying the real user needs. And trust me, every data talks about a story. So the first story which I have for you is about the clinical trials landscape study. So let me give you a little bit of background. So if you look at a clinical trial landscape study, and now with COVID coming in and the vaccination, you all have heard about emergency FDA approval or different phases of clinical study, or the vaccine study or the vaccine mandate. So what typically happens in any clinical trial, there are few scientists who would come together and they will come up with a study plan or a research plan. And then they will develop a drug. And then what they try to do is they try to start the testing of the drugs. And after certain stage, they reach to humans. And before opening it to global population, they want that drugs to be taken by a sample population, which they can later on review and make sure that whatever drugs they are providing, how they are affecting the humans. So typically every clinical study is 3 to 5 to 7 years long, and sometimes even a decade long. And it would have participants anywhere between 5,000 to 10,000, or maybe sometimes more, depending on what the study is. So that's more of a background of clinical trials. Now, typically what happens in clinical trials is, when you're looking at clinical trials, we are mostly focusing on the doctors. So whenever we think about solving any problem or looking at the data, we look only from a doctor's perspective. And when I say doctor's perspective, how can I make it easy for doctor to store the data? How can I make it easy for doctor to retrieve patient data, and so on and so forth. But rarely do we talk about the patients. So you see the patients are marked in the green circles, and the doctors and the caregivers are in orange. So we thought about, if you look at the data, coming back to the story part of data, there are two kinds of data. One, data which is created by the persona, which is doctors and caregivers. And the second is the persona, which is the patient. And we, to my surprise, till date, we had never talked about, or in the field of pharmacy and medical, nobody talks about it. And what we found out was that there is a standard medical procedures which are established at least at a country level in every country. So when I say standard medical procedure, the idea is that when you come and you go to a hospital, the extraction method of one particular disease would be same for another disease, for the other hospital as well. So the testing methods and most of the things are very standardized, and there is a procedure and protocol how you are diagnosed and you are checked. And we also identified that when a study starts, right, I was talking about 3 or 5 year clinical study, it starts for in the beginning it would have 5,000 people, but by the end of study we found out from the data that only 3,000 or 3,500 people are left. So what happens to this 15-20% of the population? Where does it go? And we figured out that they are, even the subjects which are there for clinical trials are humans, and at the end of the day they also have lives. Sometimes they have to relocate, they have to move from California to New York, or sometimes even across countries, and so on and so forth. And when that happens, they have to opt out from the studies. And the reason for that is because now they do not live in the location so that they can go back to the clinical, to the doctors for the clinical trials and give their samples. And looking at that, if you look at the problem just from data perspective, you will see, okay, patients are opting out. How does it affect the study? It's okay. Earlier we had 5,000 people, now we have 4,000 people for a study. But if you go back and see, it indirectly affects the sponsor of that clinical trial and the scientist, because the accuracy of data reduces significantly. Think about a data coming from 5,000 sample compared to 4,000. Your confidence level goes down, and we are talking about health of the human species, and it's so important, and it can lead to significant business impacts as well. So what we did was, we thought, how can we reduce this attrition where patients opt out? So I just talked about where standard procedures are there. From the data, we were able to establish that From the data, we were also able to establish that a lot of people leave the clinical studies because of the movement within the country. So what we came up with a simple, unique idea where we facilitated the doctors with the data, where they could go back and whenever a patient comes to them and says, I need to leave this study because my mom is sick and I need to move from San Jose to New York. And the this clinical scientist, before letting him opt out, he or she would look into the data and will identify which is the equivalent place where he could go to an hospital and get himself giving the same sample. So now a person who is in a cancer study, who was earlier giving the sample in San Jose, now living in New York, can go to an equivalent hospital and give the same sample. And after the sample is given in New York, the sample is returned to San Jose and the test can continue and the patient does not have to leave, uh, has to leave the system. So that way we had reduced the attrition from, 20% to 8%, which not only improved the accuracy of the clinical trials, but it also made the patients more happy and more available for the studies. So that's how, if you look, data can solve your problems. Now let's talk about another interesting aspect, which is, for patient enrollment for a heart failure drug. So there's a heart failure drug which recently got approval from FDA, and it was rated as best medicine which is available in the market. And what business wanted to do was, this was just a little bit before COVID, and COVID had hit down when they had approvals and everything in place. And they thought, why not increase our patient enrollment, because this is the best medicine available, and why not reach the market by creating a website. So what they did was they created a desktop website, and they thought people will come and enroll, but things did not fall in place. The data told that patients were hardly ever registering. So they thought, you know what, if patients are not coming in, maybe patients are using, tablets and mobile phones and other things. So why not make a responsive version of the website? And hopefully then the patients will come in, because patients will enroll, because now they can see the devices and, which they are using in their household and register. But still, the traction was nowhere to be found, and the data told that. And the next step, what they were thinking was to create a mobile app. And that's when they got in our team. The medical team got involved us, and they asked us, can you investigate why this is happening? And as I have talked to you about data, right? When I started looking at the secondary data, which was already available, I figured out that only 1.9% of the entire population of the sample who had enrolled for the medicines were the patient. Rest 98% was healthcare providers and caregivers. So typically, the patient themselves were not coming to enroll for this medicine. It was mostly the healthcare providers, doctors, or caregivers which were enrolling on behalf of the patient. So they were looking at a wrong audience over there. And then the other aspect, interesting aspect, which we came to know was the average patient age, which was 66.2 years. So we also could learn that, the heart failure, right, will typically happen to a person who has aged, right, and the elderly population, not, youngsters and other people. So what we figured out was that, looking at the data, we sampled out the set, we spoke to around 90 users, 90 actually patients who were having heart failure. And when we harmonized the data, we found out that for almost 42% of the population was tech savvy and 58% was not tech savvy. So this helped us establish that people who are not tech savvy are not going to enroll using a website anyways. But what about the 42%, which is tech savvy? Why are they not going to the portal? Why are they not registering? And this led us to do a qualitative study. So a lot of times you will have the entire decision making coming from the data, and sometimes your data will tell you which direction you should go in. So we started identifying these personas from the data, and we went back and spoke to these patients, and we asked them, what is it which stops you from enrolling? We met them in their atmosphere after they came out from from the meetings with the doctors, where they had been given advices. And what we figured out was, and before giving you examples or how it was, this was one of the quote which actually one of the patients said: I have so many questions before signing up. I have other medications, allergies, etc. What if I forget to take the medicine? I don't want Amazon shopping experience for a life-saving medicine. I need to speak to a human. And this qualitative data which came out through interviews, it helped us understand that it was the trust which was missing from that digital interface. And it was a valid concern. Why would somebody take a life-saving medicine without knowing and understanding things? Think about yourself. How many times you have gone to Walmarts and Walgreens and got your prescription and have actually read the after effects of the medicine? I think rarely anybody does that. So we want to talk to a person, we want to understand from a human, establish that trust, and then go for that medicine. And that opened a whole situation in front of us, that whatever we can do on the website, like including testimonials and other things, to get more patients. But at the end of the day, to convince a patient to enroll on this medicine, you need to speak to a human. And that led us to the creation of the first of its own kind customer engagement centers, where medical professionals would be sitting, and we had connected the entire data of patients, their historical data, and doctors together. So whenever a patient calls in and provides some basic details, the agents can fetch up the entire medical history, allergies, and entire dietary conditions, and then give specific personalized feedback and suggestion to the patients to make an informed decision. Now, what happened once we did that? We did a 3 month pilot of this engagement. And since the launch of the engagement centers, the patient enrollment has grown by more than 248%. So sometimes the problem is there, when you are looking at the data, and sometimes the data helps you in the right direction of finding the data which is there. Now let's talk about that was more about talking about the stories. But let's say if you want to do a visualization of data, how you will present that data for your management or for your senior leadership. And this EPI framework will kind of talk to you a little bit about how you can create meaningful visualization, which can talk about how our users can make a guided approach for decision making. So let's start, as I was talking about personas, right? And I'll probably connect you with that example which I was talking about. So, when I come over here, one of the objectives of the doctors from clinical trials was that when I come over here, I should be able to get the maximum accuracy of a clinical research. Now, what would be the exploration part of it? Why am I not achieving my accuracy in my study? Which is the probing part of it. What can be the problem for that accuracy? One of the issues can be patients are not showing up. Second can be drug is not behaving as it should be. Third can be budget. Fourth can be logistics. So you break down where the issue is happening, and then you go to why it is creating that issue. So in our clinical trials example, when we probe down that patients are leaving, or patients are leaving the enrollment, or they are opting out. Why are they opting out? Because life happens, they have things to do and they leave. And what that led us to was the insight, which is if we can somehow manage and understand the reason why they are leaving, we can go and work back on how to retain the patients for the study. I'm showing you a more tactical examples over here, but I wanted to explain you with an example which we just talked about in terms of a story. Now, how does that information be displayed or shown to you when you're looking at data from different kinds? So this is one of the examples how you can start with exploring, going to the probing section, further probing into the metric from dimension, and then going to the final insights where you these exclamation mark means anomalies in the data. Now, just in the same way I was talking about one perspective, so I was talking and about data from one KPI or or from an OKR perspective, that the data can also explore multiple KPIs. So you want to look at data from one key performing index indicator compared to completely different, and it will give you a completely different set of insights based on how you look at the exclusive key performance indicators. Now let me give you an example of, when you are looking at the key performance indicators, you can have different segments also. So I look at the market, I see this market seems a little wrong, I go inside it, this market within multiple countries, within country which region I want to focus on. So your data can tell you a story not only at a macroscopic level but also at a microscopic level if the relationship is established properly. Now talking about the framework, which is EPI. So we just spoke about all these visualization, but how to achieve these visualization? So one of the methods which I use is where I always start with the personas, finding their top objectives, exploring what is the problem, what is that challenges with that objective, probing and going into the details of dimensions and metrics, which will actually help to attain and find an insight which will be actionable for them. So let me give you an high level, how it looks like once you are doing a real time activity of exploration, probe and insight. So this is how the page would look like. You will talk about different materials, you will talk about how a person is drilling down, and this is a very collaborative exercise which you do with your users, business, as well as looking back at the data. And that's how you establish the data is matching the mental model of the users. And then these are the different visualization types which you can keep ready when you're talking to the users, right? There is a reason why a pie chart is used in a certain place compared to a line chart. And the reason for that is, are you doing a comparative study or you are looking at something which is the share of a pie? So, if you're looking at the sales monthly, you do not want a pie chart. You definitely want a bar chart with looking at the targets. But if you are looking at something more like, what does my sale, total entire sale is made up of? So at that point of time, pie chart may make more value to you, where you see, okay, what kind of product am I selling more or less, or what comprises the biggest fraction of it, and I should focus on that. Now the benefit of drilling down and looking at tasks from this activity, I'll just showcase one example to you over here. So you look at this data over here. If you just look at the data, or if you just go by what business has asked for, or typically what happens in our industry, where we go back and we ask the business, what are you looking for? And they say, oh, I'm looking for the calls which are coming in my office for any inquiry. And if you stop over there, which is the beginning of the exploration of data, you will create something like this. But if you take a little bit step further where you ask them, oh, okay, why do you want to know about this number? And that's when the business or the stakeholder or the product owner will tell you, oh, because I want to understand on an average how many calls I get and how many calls I'm getting now. So I can see how much the deviation is. So that kind of helps me in establishing how many people I would need on the back of the desk to answer those calls. And you land up with average. And while you are listening to that, you have also heard that a person also says, because while I'm looking at the average, I want to just see how it is typically going for the past couple of days so I can plan for the next few days. And that leads you to coming up with trends, which is over here. And if you explore and probe further and ask, why are you looking at this trend? And then you will hear from the users talking about, oh, I need to see the trend just to understand that I was expecting calls around 950 calls, which is the benchmark over here, and see how many days we are going up or less. And if we are always more than the benchmark, we may have to start thinking about hiring more people in our call centers who could help take more calls. Because at the end of the day, the people who are calling are your potential business, maybe your current business. And in today's world, how important customer engagement has become and customer service has become. So then I talk about the final aspect of it, which is, you see a small green line over here. Now this tells you the overall application health. So this is just an indicator of that KPI. So when a person is looking at a dashboard, too much information is thrown at him. And with logic, you can put down that, okay, am I fully utilizing my workforce which is there? And because every day the anticipated calls are the actual calls are always more than anticipated call. So that way this prediction is going good and they are happy, which is the best price for value which they are getting. So with just a simple method of talking and understanding the user, you are looking at the absolute value of the KPI, you look at with the average, you look at with the trend and average, you look at with the trend benchmark and average, and then finally you look at the value with trends, benchmark, average, and an overall health indicator as well. Now you see, this is just one aspect of the entire data which you are looking. Just in the same way, all these datas talk about different stories, about different KPI from different perspective, from different angles. And not only that, it also helps you understand what is going to shape next, and even filtering the information or looking at the data from different perspective. Having said that, I would again go back and say data always tells a story, and the story can be hidden in forms of the data which is readily available, the data which you have to derive out, or even sometimes data tells you what should be the next step in terms of speaking with the users or going back and testing the product with the users, or just looking at the user's pattern and behavior. And not only that, a lot of times data also helps you validate if you're looking for the right problem or the right issue. So I would just stop with saying about, I particularly feel all data and any data, they always tell you a story. The really important question is, are you listening? And with that, I'm open for questions. Thank you so much for your time, for listening to me. I'll try to answer your questions to the best, and please feel free to connect with me on these platforms, and I'll be happy to speak further. Thank you so much. And thank you, Couchbase, for providing this platform, for sharing this journey and experience with the audience. Thank you.